Alright, so welcome to this lesson where we're going to take a look at Impress.js. So Impress.js allows us to build 3D presentations using nothing more than CSS, JavaScript and HTML. It's very powerful, and as developers it's great for us because we don't have to play around with the CSS or in fact the JavaScript. All we have to do is use the attributes on the DOM elements, and then it will just automatically transition between the steps in the presentation. Very cool and effective. So once I have downloaded Impress.js, you can download it from MDN, which is Mozilla Developer Network, or you can download it from GitHub. And what I've done is I've added in a little picture right here that we're going to play around with in our demo file. So our demo.html file is where we're going to be creating a presentation from scratch. Then we're just going to quickly overview the index.html file, which is a lot more complex presentation, but again the same principle applies and it's very easy to create presentations. We have a CSS folder. This is just for the demo, for the index.html file, just to style that page up. But however, our demo.html file has no CSS, and Impress.js does not require any CSS file to be included. However, of course, you will need to include the Impress.js file. Once that's included, and once you've initialized your Impress presentation, then everything should be set up and ready to go. So what we're going to go ahead and do is take a look at the demo.html file. So right here you'll be able to see we have a very basic file. There's no CSS that's being linked in here. And what we have here is a link to the Impress.js file, and also we have a little script which is calling the Impress function, and then we're calling the init method. So the init method is initialize, which means to start something. So we're going to say, okay, start the presentation. Now what we're going to do is keep these two script tags at the bottom of the body element right here, and that way it makes life a lot easier. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, first of all, I need to set up my presentation. A lot like when you go into PowerPoint or Keynote, you need to say, right, create a new presentation. So the way we do that with Impress is we create a div element with an ID of Impress. And this is what JavaScript is looking for. It's looking for this div element, and then it's going to say, right, I've found that, let's go ahead and initialize the presentation. Once we've done that, then we can start to create steps. So what are steps? Well, if I open up Safari and we take a look at the index.html file, you'll be able to see here that what we can do is iterate through the steps. So we have step 1, which is board, and then we have step 2, step 3, and so on and so forth. Alright, that is really cool. So this is not like slides where you got one slide and then it goes over to another slide, then goes over to another slide. It's not like that at all. You have a step in your animation, so you go to the next step, the next step. So we're just iterating through, and of course that just makes it a presentation tool essentially. So what I want to go ahead and do is start to create some steps in our presentation. How do we do that? Well, create a div with a class of step, like so. And that is the first step in our presentation. Now you don't need to say step 1, step 2, step 3. It goes in the order of the DOM elements. So for example, this will be the first step, this will be the second step, and so on and so forth. And you can have as many steps as you like. So the first step is just going to contain a header 1 element right here, and it's going to say header 1, I am the first step. Save that, go ahead and let's preview this now. Now you'll notice something very interesting. Normally when you just add a header 1 element, what happens is it goes all the way up to the top left hand corner. In this case, that's not happening, and the reason being is because what it's doing is it's using the transformation of the center point. So it's got the center origin. So right here we have the step. So let's go ahead and inspect that. There's the step, and you'll notice now that the window is shrunk, so is the presentation. And what you'll be able to see right here is that we have the step, and it's centralized into the entire presentation, so the entire body basically. And you'll also notice that with the HTML root element, you now have a height of 100%. So you can obviously see what it's doing there. It's keeping everything central. That's something very important to note. Alright, so once I've gone ahead and done that, the next thing that I want to take a look at is adding some content into the second step. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say header 2, and you can put whatever you like in here. You could put an iframe with a YouTube video, Vimeo video. You could put anything, absolutely anything you wanted. So I'm just going to say hello world. It's got to be done. Alright, so once I've gone ahead and done that, I can go back, hit refresh, and now they're both overlapping one another. So I actually want to do something interesting, because if I press my right and left arrow, nothing is really happening. But you can see up here it's saying step 1, step 2, and vice versa. But we don't actually want that, because nothing's happening. So how do we actually move these around in the 3D space? Well, we're going to use the data attribute. Now, first I'm going to show you how to move stuff. So, you can move stuff or translate on the X, the Y, and the Z axis. Very important. So when I say data, so I'm putting in the data attribute, and then if I just define an axis, for example, X, Y, or Z, it's going to move it on that specific axis. So I'm just going to say, okay, move on the X axis 300. And go ahead and save that, go back and hit refresh. And there you go. So now we can go, there's step 1 and there's step 2, which is like so. Then also, what I can go ahead and do is move on the Z. So let's go ahead and say data Z equals 400. So we're bringing it closer to our perspective. So you'll notice that header 2 actually went further backwards. So now when I go to step 2, you'll notice this header 1 or step 1 zooms up. Just like so. How cool is that effect? And again, we can move on the y-axis. So I can say data y, and so I can move that possibly 400 pixels. So I can go back, hit refresh, and there we go. Again, such a nice effect and very easy to accomplish. So I now have a very small footprint of a presentation. I've not had to write in lines and lines of code to do this. All I've had to do is just basically define the div element, say, okay, this is a step in my Impress presentation. Don't forget to initialize it and so forth down here. And then what we're doing is we're using the data attributes to basically move the object around in 3D space. And it's not just limited to obviously translation, we can rotate as well. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually rotate this now. So I can say data again, so we're using the data attribute, and then what we can do is say rotate. Now if you just say rotate like so, it will rotate on the Z axis, or you could say rotate -Z right there. They both do exactly the same thing. So don't get confused about it, just remember they do exactly the same thing. And I'm just going to say equals, and we'll just make that 10. Alright, so when I go back here and hit refresh, you'll be able to notice, there we go. Because we're now on step 1, we've slightly rotated the second step, so when we go to the second step, you'll notice that it rotates around so it looks normal. And then what we can go ahead and do is again start rotating even more. So I can say data rotate equals 40, hit refresh, and again you're just going to get the same thing. And now you'll see that you're getting this amazingly cool effect. And it's very, very speedy as well, because don't forget we're running this on the GPU. Data rotate, and then I'm defining the axis that I want to rotate on, which is X. So I say -X equals, and then we'll set that to 90. So we're going to get a really cool effect right here. So I'm going to hit refresh. You'll notice now it's gone all the way up over there in the distance. But it's not actually changed, it's just changed its angle, so it looks like it's further away. How cool is that? Alright, so that's rotation. So what about scaling? Well, I can say div class step, and then I can say data hyphen scale. Now you can't say scale on the X, the Y, the Z, and so forth. It's just scale. And so when I do that, I can say 1. That's by default, so that's 100%. That is its original size. If I say 2, it's going to go up twice as big. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually put this as the first step, just so that we can see this clearly. Alright, so here we have the class step, data scale 1, and I'm just going to set this to a header 1 again, and it's going to say scale me. And so we're going to say data scale 1, save that, go back, hit refresh, and it says scale me right there. You'll notice that that's absolutely fine, but let's say I want this a little bit bigger. So let's say I want this to be 4 times bigger. So it's now going to be 400%. And you'll notice now that we now have this in the background, and that's because it's all in perspective. So you'll notice now this is actually gigantic when you look at it. So it has actually scaled it up, and if I was to very quickly put that down to its original size, 1 for 100%, you'll notice how small it becomes, like so. And again, you might want to put some translation onto here, so we could say data x equals, and then make that 2000. Alright, and then we're going to scale this up 3 times, or 300%. And again, you have this awesomeness going off. And of course, you can play around with those values and play around with all of those different values to get the type of presentation that you want. And very quickly, we don't have to, just stick with, these header 1 elements right here. You could put in an image right here. So it's just like working with regular HTML. So we're going to go to desktop, Impress.js, and we're going to select this Envato JPEG file. And then we're going to put in the width, the height, alt attribute, Envato, and then save that, go back out, hit refresh, and then we can start to iterate through. And there we go. Nice and easy. In fact, it's too easy. No, there's no such thing. Alright, so once we've done that, again, you can apply some styling to it. So let's say style type text/CSS. Alright, and then what we want to do is basically target one of these steps. So I could put in another class right here. So actually we'll do that. We'll say box. And we'll apply that class also to this element. Again, it could be an ID, but I'm not going to make it an ID for now. So I'm just going to say box, and then I'm just going to put in a minimum width of 200 pixels and give it some padding, background color, I'll just make it a sort of a light gray. And then the border, and again you could have border radius. You could do all the styling you wanted to, like so. Very, very easy. And there we go, it's all styled up and ready to go. And now, that's bugging me, so I'm going to put that to the bottom. So I can easily change the order of my steps by simply changing the order in which they are placed in the DOM. So once I've gone ahead and done that, let's take a look now at actually controlling the animation itself. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a link up here. So I'm going to say ahref. It's going to be a dummy link, so I'm just going to put a hash right there so it doesn't go anywhere. And then I'm just going to give this an ID of nxt for next. So basically, this is going to iterate through the next step, the next step, and the next step. So I'm just going to put in some text right here, next. Alright, so now I have my script tags right here, and we're initializing our Impress presentation. So what I want to do first of all is point to this DOM element, which has the ID of nxt. So I'm just going to say var elem, standing for element. And then I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to say document.getElementById, and I'm going to get the ID of nxt. Then the next thing that I'm going to do is say lm, so I'm pointing to that variable, which is effectively referring to that DOM element right there, and I want to add an event listener. So I want to wait for something to happen, for some user interaction, in this case a click. Once I've done that, then I want to run a function, otherwise return false. Now inside of there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say basically impress, and I'm going to say next, just like so. Very, very easy. And once I do that, what I will have is a link that allows me to iterate through the steps. So we have step 1, I'm going to hit next, then we go to step 2, and then we go to step 3, and then we go back to step 1 again. And of course you can do previous as well, so I'm just going to say previous, and I'm going to give it the ID of prev, and we'll copy this previous, and I'm going to get the ID of prev, and then I'm going to say prev down here as well. So we're pointing to this variable, which is pointing to this DOM element. We're waiting for some user interaction, which is a click. Once it has been clicked, we're going to fire this function off that's going to call the impress function, and then we're going to call the prev method. And that way we can go next and previous like so. So we have previous just like so, and then next as well. Perfect. So once I've gone ahead and done that, let's go to a certain point in our animation. How do we do that? Well, what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a new link, and I'm going to say go to the end right here. So I'm just going to say an ID of end, and then I'm just going to copy this right here, paste it below, want to point to the div with the ID of end right there. And then what I want to do is just change the name of the variable like so. And again, we're waiting for a click, so some user interaction, and then it's going to fire this function off, and then we can use the goTo method. And once we do that, what we can do is specify a number, which is basically going to be from 0 all the way to how many steps you have. So this is step 0 right here, and this is step 1. So don't forget, it's 0 indexed. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is set this to 2. So this will actually go to the end because you have 0, 1, and then 2. And if you're familiar with the JavaScript world, you'll know that it's pretty much 0 based. So I'm going to go back into Safari, hit refresh, and then we can say end, and we go right to the last step in our presentation because we told it to. Also, you can actually specify an ID. So what I can go ahead and do is put in here an ID of end, just like so, and we'll say end s because that ID has already been taken. So end s for end step, and then I'm going to paste that in as a string down here like so. And once I do that, I can save it and hit refresh, and again we can go to the end. So you can point to an ID, or you could actually refer to the index that it is in the DOM order right here. So 0 all the way up to how many you have. So once I've gone ahead and done that, I can also pass in a second parameter, so you can put a comma in there, and this will actually determine the amount of milliseconds it will take to actually transition to that specific step. So I could make this 4,000, so that's going to be 4 seconds. So that's actually going to be slower, or at least I think it will be slower, when we go to step -1, let's do that, and then say end. And now you'll notice it takes a lot longer to actually transition over to the end step. Now you'll also notice it doesn't say step 3, it says end s, which is the ID of that step, which is very cool. And so as you can see, this is how JavaScript is working. It's working with the address bar, or the location in which the browser is pointing, and it's pretty cool. It's very, very intuitive and a very good way to actually work. So that's basically how to use Impress.js. And then what you can go ahead and do is take a look at the index file. So right here we have our CSS, which again you can go ahead and play around with, but you don't have to use this CSS file. As I said, Impress.js will include all the CSS that's necessary for it to work. You don't have to include any CSS whatsoever. And you'll be able to see here we have lots and lots of steps, and we have lots and lots of data attributes. But that's basically it. Just look at it very, very simply. All it is a div element which is representing a step right here. So we have class step, and then we have the data attribute. Now the first steps right here, they're again steps. You must give them that class, and then you can give them other class names as well. So that, for example, this one's slide, so we can style it easily inside of CSS, just like we did right here with the box class. But you must make sure you put that step class in there, and then you can go ahead and play around with that in the browser, change some values, perhaps put some YouTube videos in here. But what's also interesting about the index.html file is right up the top here, you'll see that on the body we by default set class as impress-not-supported. Now if Impress is supported, the JavaScript will run and it will simply take out that class, so you haven't got to worry about that. But by default it's going to say Impress not supported, and this development right here, which has the class of fallback-message, is going to display if Impress is not supported. And so if it isn't supported, what's going to happen is that's going to show up and say, hey, you've not got a browser that supports Impress.js. However, the contents of the presentation is still visible. You're just not going to get the fancy transitions, and they're all just going to be stacked up underneath each other. So it's still visible, it's still presentable, but you just have a much cooler way to display this to newer browsers. Obviously the progressive enhancement is happening here. And then with older browsers, or perhaps even mobile devices that just simply do not support CSS 3D transitions, no problem, it'll just display a box saying your browser doesn't support this. And that's absolutely fine. So once you have played around with this, experiment with it and just carry on changing those values to come up with the presentation of your dreams. So thanks for watching this lesson, and in the next lesson we're going to take a look at Impress.js, which is a fantastic library for, folding up divs and sort of curling stuff and loads of cool stuff. So check that one out. So thanks for watching this lesson, and I hope you can join me in the next one.